Hello, Mr. Manuelium. Actually, this one might be hello, Mr. Ciabatta Bread, because I just really want to ramble about the Omori Genshin Impact crossover fanfic, and thus it will contain spoilers for Omori. So don't listen to this if you care about that. And Jenna, don't listen to this at all, because I'm going to ramble about Genshin Impact, i.e. the cardinal sin. But yeah, it's been stuck in my head, so I shall monologue about it until it gets out of here. Art-wise, I also need to I have too many art speed paints saved up at this point. The backlog is getting a little ridiculous, so I just need to start making more of these. This time the art is again getting synced with the audio, so I don't know what speed it'll be going on. And content-wise, I just wanted to test out a technique with adding a glow to the line art, which I've seen people do, but I couldn't figure out how they did it. And then, I actually stopped and thought about it for 5 minutes and realized a pretty easy way of doing it. So this is just a quick doodle for that. But yeah, I'll try to upload another speed paint in a minute that will, actually be watchable for, the 2 out of 3 people who might tune in. Honestly, I think Omori is you can go into it knowing the end and the dramatic irony will carry it at least a little bit, but I'm not one who cares about spoilers, but I do think going into Omori spoiler free is worth it. So yeah, if you don't want spoilers, turn back now. Genuinely, this might be the first video essay that is for truly nobody. So I have no idea who's going to be listening in on this. I'll just give my hypothetical non-audience the rundown on both the relevant bits of Omori and Genshin for this fic, because God, it's stuck in my head. What a fascinating crossover. So on the Omori side, it is the basic plot of Omori is that, you play through the game as Omori / Sunny, the main character, who's a total shut-in, and I would say most of the game takes place in Headspace, which is very bright and saturated and a sort of little, fairy tale imaginary world, it's very childish in a purposeful way. And, you fight through monsters and go on quests with your friends and, rescue people, and while you're in Headspace, one of your friends, Basil, goes missing in a oddly creepy manner. There's, little hints of horror around the edges, and so you're trying to get him back and rescue him and all that jazz. But of course, you get very sidetracked on your little mission. And then there are the parts of the game where you wake up and you're in the real world. And here in the real world, your friends are all a little older, a little more bitter. Some of them are gone. Everyone's a bit more traumatized and pretty different from how they are in your Headspace streams. And of course, the most important difference of all is that your sister Mari is dead. And eventually, through playing through both Headspace, but also, talking to people in real life and coming out of your shell a little, it's the last couple of days before you move, so it's kind of your last chance to meet up with old friends. But over the course of that, eventually you find out the truth of what happened to your sister, which is, and again, big spoilers, this is the main heart of Omori, is that one day, one night, you had an argument with her, and it was a complete accident, a genuine mistake, but you pushed her and she fell down the stairs and she fucking died because she fell down the stairs and broke her neck, And then Basil's the only one who sees it, and he's her best friend, and so the two of you, because you're small scared children, cover it up by hanging her from a tree in the garden and pretend that was a suicide. So that's what's driven your friend group apart, and it's pretty clear that Omori has been pretty much completely destroyed by this. Has not, understandably so, has just, that guilt has kind of decimated him as a human being, and Basil's not much better. And the rest of your friend group is reeling from, they don't know what happened, but they're still reeling from Mari's supposed suicide. And most of the game is the metaphor is, of course, that you are fighting yourself, you're fighting your own guilt, and this... it sounds very grim when you put it like this, but most of the game is really just you trying to convince yourself not to kill yourself. And, of course, if you play your cards right, you can finally let go, and tell your friends what really happened, and move on from it for real this time, And then on the Genshin side, this is the much stupider side, unfortunately. There is the little corner of Genshin fandom that I have been completely obsessed with for no good reason is in Mondstadt, which is basically fantasy Germany. There's the two characters that I am really, I think that was such a fascinating backstory, is Diluc Karagenvinder and Kaya Alberic. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing any of those names right, and I do not care to find out. But yeah, their whole thing is that Kaya came to Mondstadt as like a little child. He was abandoned there, and the Ragavinders adopted him into their family. The Ragavinders being a local, like, very wealthy former aristocrat, like, wine family. They produce wines, and like, they have what seems to be a pretty happy childhood together until Diluc's 18th birthday, whereupon on his birthday, he and his father are attacked by a dragon. Unclear what the dragon was doing there, what the fuck that's about. Genshin's pretty bad at writing, so this entire backstory is very shaky and the timeline is non-existent. But general fanon consensus is, they get attacked by a dragon. Diluc's father uses a delusion, which is a evil magic item, essentially. The details really don't matter here, to fight off the dragon, but in the process is so fucked up by using an evil magic artifact that Diluc has to kill him. After that, as some unspecified amount of time passes, and Diluc, who has, and Kai, they've both been in the Knights, which are the local, security sort of force. He goes to them, but the Knights want to cover up his dad's death because they don't want the fact that a civilian managed to take down a dragon, whereas the Knights failed to do so, as public information, and so he quits on the spot. Fair enough. And then later, possibly that same day, Kaya tells him that, like, oh, BT dubs, I was sent here as a spy from Conria, which is a foreign destroyed nation, and I was sent here to destroy Mondstadt and be a guy on the inside, and, like, Diluc fucking loses it at that point and attacks him. And in canon, like, this is, the point where Kaya gets his vision. Magic artifact, don't worry about it. That, like, saves his life, and then Diluc goes off and leaves for 4 years to do who knows what. This is never specified, but just goes out traveling and somehow gets banned from a country there. And, like, basically hunts down the organization that creates the evil magic artifacts, essentially. That's the SparkNotes version of it. And then at the story start of canon, he has come back, and Kai is a captain of the Knights, and the two of them have a horrible, awkward sort of, like, they do not get along, and they are very, like, snippy with each other, but it's also pretty clear that, like, oh, they both still love each other beneath it all, classic relationship dynamic. And, I really love this because just, like, there is so much drama here happening that even, like, the badly written fanfics are still at least kind of interesting, because it's very hard to fuck this up in a way that makes it boring, Hence why I've been lurking about in this corner of the fandom. And so, when I saw that someone had made an Omori and Genshin Impact crossover with these guys, I was like, I honestly don't think that's gonna work, like, because my assumption was that, like, oh, well, Krapus is Mari in this case, he's the one who was killed, and then Kai will be probably slotting into the role of Basil, as the sort of tertiary accomplice slash guy who's just kind of suspicious in there. And like, and I was like, low-key, I don't think this crossover has legs, but I saw it in someone's bookmarks because I like snooping through people's bookmarks for recommendations, and they had left like a pretty happy comment on it, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's good, you know? And so I'm like, you know what, I've I've taken a chance on stories that had worse hooks, so sure, I'll read this, you know? And like, at first, the first half of the story did not fucking work for me, like, at all. It was just the worst parts of both in a very specific way of, like, I think the worst part of Omori are two things. One is just, like, headspace wanders too much. It's just, like, you really feel it when you, like, I think you feel it less when you, like, play through the game yourself, but it's really obvious in a Let's Play. It's that, like, headspace just takes a long time, and, like, is kind of, even as you slowly figure out that, like, oh, this is all, like, a big metaphor, it's kind of a little too, it's not clearly symbolic or metaphorical enough, and just, like, wanders around, so you kind of spend a lot of time in this place that's pretty fun, but, like, is clearly, it has a sense of, like, alright, let's get back to the main plot. I want to know what happened to my fucking sister, you know? Like, it's not dropping enough clues with enough frequency, and, like, you fight things in there and, like, do stuff, but it's all, like, it's a pastiche of your childhood, and, like, the fun things you did then, but not much more than that. It's kind of shallow, and it's kind of unexpectedly shallow in that way, you know, like, and it's just, like, you really get the sense of, like, you're wasting my time, let me get back to the main plot, you know, which I guess, on a metatextual level, is kind of, like, you could read that as a purposeful thing of, like, oh, you gotta get out of headspace and confront your real life, and headspace is empty on purpose because the real world is more and it's like, okay, but also, like, you have made a very long section that I do have to play through, so, you know, you can write badly on purpose, but you are still making me sit through bad writing in that case, you know? And I felt that a lot with this fic at the beginning. I was just like, you know, headspace is interesting, but also, like, it was a bit better with this one for reasons I'll get into later, but there was still a sense of that. And also, like, second thing I don't like about Omori is that, like, all of the characters are very young in a way that you can really feel. I've mentioned this previously in a different video essay, but, like, it just, everyone is very, they're not childish, but you can tell that they are all children, and, like, no one here has a sense of real emotional maturity that sort of takes some of the teeth out of the themes it's trying to get into. Like, you know, it's about mental health and suicide and self-harm and all that jazz, but also, like, on a fundamental level, it's like, these are kids who don't really have the tools to fully grapple with these things, which is part of it. But in this case, I think it's, like, parentheses, derogatory, parentheses, it's hard to fully explore these themes in a, like, emotionally complex way, you know? And, like, this specific facet really made the first part of the crossover not work, because it was like, okay, surprisingly, you would not know this based on the character art, but Genshin Impact characters are all, like, around, like, they are supposed to be adults, you know? They do not look like adults, they look like they are teenagers who are 18 at the oldest, but they are supposed to be adults and, like, you know, in their, like, 20 to 30s-ish, probably 20s, I don't, yeah, and, like, the Omori, like, coming into that, like, just drags them all into, like, everyone sounds younger and less mature, like, and they usually don't even sound that mature, quite frankly, and so, like, it lends this sort of childish air to everything that doesn't really mesh with the characters, and doesn't really work with, like, the weight of the topics they are talking about, you know? Like, someone talks and I'm like, this should not be the head of the Knights. She should be, like, in high school. Like, no, you shouldn't have a sword and be fighting things. Someone should take the sword. No, you should be doing other things, like going to a movie and with, like, go see a movie with friends and buy some popcorn or something. You're not supposed to be doing this. Who let a child be in charge? Where are the adults around here? You know, like, that was, like, the overwhelming feeling I had, and just, like, this is already present in normal Genshin, but the addition of, like, Omori's tone really made it, like, obvious. But the story did have, like, generally just good writing, good enough that I stuck with it, and also, like, in this world, like, you know, Diluc's obviously in the place of Omori. What the author has done was that, so Genshin Impact is really unclear with, like, who knows who, but the author has made the choice that, like, okay, Jean and Barbara, who are sisters, and also Eula, were, along with Kai and Diluc, were, like, they were childhood best friends, you know, those 5 of them were, like, a little crew together, and they hung out and, like, you know, were friends. And that is honestly a pretty, most people don't write them that way, and so that was novel enough that I stuck with it. I liked seeing their little interactions and their relationships with each other, even though I wasn't super sold on it, TBH, yet. But, you know, it was enough to carry me through. And throughout the story, like, you know, Diluc's come back to Mondstadt, but we find out that Kaya hasn't yet. Like, in canon he stays in Mond, but apparently in this one he's also left after Diluc. And so, for the first half of the story, I was just, like, genuinely considering just skipping a couple chapters forward, because I'm like, okay, just get me to there, like, oh, they come back and they have a reconciliation, and we have learned, and we've gone on a journey of self-discovery and healing and blah blah blah, you know, blah blah blah, like, okay, just get me the fucking narrative catharsis at the end and I can be out of here. But I didn't, and, like, I stuck with it in time, and it was at the, like, almost at the exact middle of the story, where Diluc, who's been, like, running about in Headspace, Omori style, this whole time, has a conversation with Kaya in Headspace, and it's like... And that was the moment where I realized that, like, oh, I see the canon divergence you've done. Kaya's not gone. He's dead. You killed him that night, didn't you? He's not Basil, he's Mari in this one also. And that made me start crying because I was very sad. But yeah, like, it's... On one hand, I don't think it's clever because I think I was stupid. In hindsight, it's immensely obvious that this is, like, a pretty obvious way for the story to adapt onto each other. But it really fucking worked on me, so I'm not gonna knock it down too bad. And so then, like, the second half of the story, like, with that knowledge in place, the whole thing came together again, and, like, the two texts were, like, went from being, like, just each other's weak points amplified, went into actually covering for each other's and, like, really propping each other up. Like, with that, the story takes a bit of, like, takes into a slightly darker turn, like, not darker, but more somber, I suppose, as presumably most readers figure it out. Previously, everyone had felt very young, but now, like, more of the Genshin characters have, like, they're discussing their backstories, they're talking about what they did during the 4 years Diluc was gone, and, like, you start getting more of the sense of, like, oh yeah, these are adults, they have lived, they have, like, you know, experienced the world, and that is informing them in a way that the Omori characters do not have, like, experience informing them. And then, like, Headspace, which had previously seemed very empty and a bit of a waste of time, especially in Omori, suddenly comes together super well with Genshin because, for the specific fact that, like, Genshin characters are fucking gacha characters trying to bait you into using money, so they have, like, really strong motifs, which the Omori characters don't really have as much, and so suddenly Headspace becomes much more rich in symbolism as, like, everything in there becomes metaphorical for a relationship or a piece of the past in a way that Omori never quite managed, because, like, in Omori, the, like, little doodles of stars or something, like, they don't really mean much of anything. They're just, you know, childish doodles. They are a signifier of childhood, but not of, like, a specific relationship. Whereas in Genshin Impact, the stars, specifically the four-pointed stars, are very specifically associated with Kaya, so now the fact that they're everywhere in Headspace takes on a very, like, depressing sort of undertone. And in Headspace, they are fighting through the Parliament of Owls. That's the little, like, which is, like, both a childish enemy. This is a monster from a children's book, you know? But also, like, owls are the birds specifically associated with Diluc, and it's like, you're fighting, like, you know, like, do I even have to say it? Like, you are the thing that you need to fight. You are the thing that you need to protect your little brother from. You are the thing that needs to be killed. And it's like, alright, Jesus. It's also, I think, like, one of the biggest weaknesses of Genshin is that it's really, the characters are very isolated from each other. You don't really see them interacting with each other a lot in the game, or at least that's what I presume. And so it's, like, really difficult to get a good handle on, like, who knows who. Like, there are a lot of characters where I'm like, these two characters should talk to each other. They should have an opinion on each other, you know? Like, their backstories and philosophies are such that, like, theoretically, they should know each other and, like, have thoughts about the other person, but you just don't know if they do. Like, it's really hard to just figure out who, like, knows each other, you know? There's, for example, in Mon, like, Albedo is a kind of a homunculus, I think, some kind of, like, alchemical thing. He's not human, and, like, he's here doing alchemy. He's also from Conria, and, he has his own separate backstory, apparently, presumably unrelated to Kaya's whole we're gonna take over Mon plan, and it's like, you'd think that Kaya and Diluc would both have opinions about this guy. They would have, like, like, he is not open about the fact he's from Conria, but he has, like, the star on his throat on full display, and so it's, like, you know, not exactly a huge leap of logic, and, like, it's like, okay, do you two, like, do y'all know each other? Like, Albedo, are you CC'd in on the takeover mod with a secret spy plan? Hang on, if you're here, why did we even need the secret spy? You know, like, and it's just, like, it's maddeningly, vague in a way that is, like, lends itself to creative fan work interpretations, but also is, like, that's bad writing, prima facie, you know? But because, like, Omori is so deeply steeped in childhood, the author has to, like, take much more pains into, like, explicitly drawing out, like, okay, we've known each other for years, I haven't known you because I didn't know you before I left, you know, like, this is all laid down in much more exacting detail, and, like, you get the sense that, like, oh yeah, like, Eula and, Jean and Barbara, like, it goes into their history as a group of 5, and, like, and you believe it, you know, like, they feel like childhood friends. It's still, like, a little tinged with Omori's, like, overly young tone, but it comes together much better than, like, Genshin Impact stands on its own. And, like, the tragedy at the heart of it is still, it is slightly different in nature now, especially since a pretty popular piece of fanon is that, like, Kaya told Diluc on that night on purpose as, like, essentially a suicide attempt, because it truly, the answer of when the worst possible time to tell someone you're secretly a spy is like, subjective, but right after they kill their dad and quit their lifelong childhood organization is, like, and also on their birthday, is, like, pretty up there, you know? Like, it is such hilariously bad timing that it's hard not to read a certain level of intent into it, you know? And so, like, I think, like, it adds to the tragedy of it in the way that, like, is different, like, combines both works very well, of, like, it holds the worst parts of, like, that night, in both canons, of, like, the sheer desolation of accidentally killing your own sibling when you really did love them and didn't mean it, and it genuinely was just truly a mistake, coming from Omori, and then the horrible, like, but it kind of wasn't a mistake, you did mean to do it at least a little bit coming from Genshin, just, like, makes the horror of it so much more potent, and works so well, and, like, kudos to the author, they just, like, stuck with it. Kai really is dead, he's buried in the riverbed now, and, like, they don't pull back on it, they don't pull the punch, and, you know, it ends the same way Omori does, after like, essentially a fight with yourself, and then, but now coming in with the imagery of Diluc's time in Snezhnaya, which is always fascinating. I do love freezing to death in the snow. It was just such a good use of, like, both texts in a crossover, and I'm kind of fucking obsessed with it, and I've been thinking about it incessantly because I keep reading other tragedies from other fandoms and they're just not as well done. Like, this specific conjunction of both stories really created something with much more emotional depth than either individually could. It also did this really interesting thing with points of view that I simply must steal it for something, for one of my own work someday, where the past is always dictated in third person, impartial and true, and the present is always dictated in second person, and it is only at the end of the story that you realize that, like, oh, it's being told sort of by the ghost of Kaya haunting the narrative, that's why it's in second person, with, like, saying you did this, you did that, and it's only after the very end where Diluc lets go that the present shifts into third person, it becomes once more impartial and unhaunted, and, like, I'm fucking obsessed with that. In general, you only see that done with first person, actually, where it's, like, little hints that, like, the main character is saying I and, like, telling you about this thing that happened to them, and at the end you realize where exactly, at what point in time they're narrating this in the story, you know, and whom to. I see it very rarely done with second, though I probably have, but it's just, I'm very obsessed with this. Ugh. Anyway, I have no idea who's listening to this one, so whoever you are, until next time.